and welcome to Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shepard-Nadze. An heir to a fortune-turned mercenary boss, Erik Prince founded Blackwater, the world's biggest private military company, scoring billions in government contracts in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the public backlash that followed news of atrocities committed by his people forced him out of the business. Are mercenaries bound to cross lines? Can they be controlled? And is civilian suffering inevitable when people are given license to kill? Well, we'll ask the man himself in our program today.
Blackwater, the world's most powerful private army. A darling of the US government, they made a killing plunging holes in America's war on terror. But as soon as innocent Iraqis died, Washington is accused of hanging its paid fighters out to dry. Did the hired guns really go out of control in the war zone? Were they just thrown under the bus by the White House? Or did they get what was coming to them?
Erik Prince, founder of the biggest US private military contractor, Blackwater. Welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us. So I'm just going to start from the very beginning. You've created Blackwater to train US Navy SEALs. So how did it become one of the biggest security contractors in the world?
Well, you know, I guess I was an accidental tourist. I got out of the Navy, out of the SEAL teams, because my father died, my wife was sick with cancer, so I built a facility to stay connected to the SEAL teams. You know, the SEAL team, special operations units in America have been using private facilities really since the 1970s, and no one had ever done it on an industrial scale. And so I did. We had sold my father's business. I took some of the money from that, and I built the facility. And then, one thing led to another. There was a terrible, tragic shooting in Colorado called the Columbine shootings. And then the USS Cole was blown up in Yemen in 2000. And then, of course, after 9/11, we kept saying yes when the U.S. government called to need our help for training or logistics support, aviation support, security. One thing led to another, and we grew very quickly.
So you obviously got innumerable number of government contracts. How do you explain your success? Is it because the military wasn't able to do their job properly?
Our success was based on, we had primarily former special operations people in our management team, many of whom had gone on to business school and worked in regular industry, and combining the best of industry knowledge with kind of a SEAL team, special operations, can-do attitude. It worked. And, look, the U.S. military is very large, very capable, very good at conventional operations. But when you stop a massive conventional operation and now have to retask and become a counterinsurgency force, that creates some gaps. You can't take that air defense missile guy and make him into a policeman or into a bodyguard that quickly. So our skill set was taking existing pools of talent, guys that had served before, giving them the right training, the right equipment, the right capabilities to go out and do a job on a temporary basis.
So is this what you were essentially, policemen and private guards, bodyguards? Is this your main difference with the military?
Look, the main missions of a contractor like that is not to do offensive combat operations, but to play defense when necessary, whether it's guarding a base, guarding people, guarding a convoy, providing support, aviation support. So we're not going out there doing offensive missions, but rather supporting the uniform services while they're doing their offensive missions. And certainly operating that close or along the edge of battle means that sometimes we get shot at. And so whether some of our helicopters were shot down, our aircraft were shot at, and certainly our men were shot at on an almost daily basis.
But you were operating in a war zone, right? So the military in Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, had very strict rules of engagement. Did you follow them?
Sure. Depending on which customer you're working for, whether you're working for the U.S. military or U.S. State Department, they all have very similar rules of engagement. And ours were defensive. You'd have to go through a whole use of force continuum, all kinds of things you'd have to do before lethal force would be used.
But I guess what I'm asking is that if a mercenary commits a crime in combat, who holds them responsible? Because in an army, for example, there is a hierarchy, always someone above you looking over your shoulder. And if you do something that, who was doing that inside Blackwater thing, the hierarchy thing?
Well, the rules of engagement, again, come from the government that you're working for. Technically, the work we're doing for the State Department, which we got a lot of unwelcome attention for, they were not mercenaries. I mean, they were American guys, former U.S. servicemen themselves that had served honorably in the U.S. military, that went back to work, volunteered to go back and serve in a bodyguard or security capacity. If there is wrongdoing, it can be investigated certainly by the military, or certainly prosecuted through the U.S. Civil justice system.
Right, but what I'm asking is that within the Blackwater, was there a hierarchy to convict them of crimes? Was there someone to tell them this is wrong, and you're off duty, or you just waited for the State Department to tell you it's wrong?
No. Certainly, we had internal mechanisms for policing our people, for the equipment they're using, for equipment accountability, where they're supposed to be, for the rules of engagement, all the rest. But as a private company, we're not empowered to prosecute a guy. I can't incarcerate someone. I can't punish them. All we could do is fire them or fine them. But beyond that, we didn't have the authorities to do more than that to an individual. That is the sole realm of a government.
All right. But you've said that your men were guards, not investigators. They shoot to kill and don't check the pulse. And that's from your book. That's a direct quote. What gave you the right to behave in that way?
Well, look, they're performing a defensive mission. So, every day between Iraq and Afghanistan, the company did more than 100,000 missions, protective missions, and no one under our care was ever killed or injured. And each time there was an event where our men had to use their weapons, it was documented. And of all those times they had to use the weapons, it still comes out to less than 0.5% of those incidents. So the idea that they were trigger happy it's not accurate. If they are attacked, if they are threatened, if there are whether it's the threat of a car bomb, a small arms ambush, sniper fire, whatever, all the things that can attack you in a war zone, they had the tools and the equipment that they had to defend themselves or defend their protectees.
How did you, as a head of that organization back in those times, make sure that someone you were hiring wouldn't be a shoot first, ask question later kind of a person?
There's actually very detailed hiring requirements for our company, and then also to perform on those contracts. Of course, a criminal background check would be performed. We'd check their service records to make sure they were honorably served in the U.S. military. Most of them already were decorated for merit and for valor in combat. They'd have to go through a psychological evaluation, and then they'd go through hundreds of hours of additional training and qualification under our supervision, also under the supervision of the State Department or military customer before they could go out. So it's not like we were just hiring someone off the street. We're hiring proven professionals that are, again, tested, evaluated, stressed, to make sure that they're competent and able and have good judgment to serve in those kind of situations. And
what about the use of drugs? We also heard in court. Was that individual slip-ups, or did you just look the other way to let the employees blow off the steam?
Well, that's another one of those nonsense charges, and we had routinely drug tested the men. They were certainly drug tested as part of the pre-screening hiring process, but not only were normal drugs not permitted, but steroids as well. Any kind of body-altering or mind-altering drugs was not permitted.
Mm-hmm. And as a former...
And it was a firing offense, and if someone was found to have been using them, they were immediately left the company. They were fired.
But did you have many instances where you had to fire people for that?
Sure. I mean, we fired people for having the wrong sight on their weapon. We fired people for having bad haircuts. We fired people for minor theft issues. We fired a lot of people because we held a very, very tight standard, and we didn't permit nonsense. Mm-hmm.
But as a former head of the Blackwater back then, can you say with 100% certainty that you knew what went down on the ground, that you controlled the situation completely?
Well, anytime we employ people, and people make mistakes. We as a company did a very good job, I'm confident of screening, of vetting, of training, of putting people out. But if you have, one bad egg out of 1,000, sure, they can make a mistake or do something stupid, and you fire them. Even a turbine engine, which maybe has 2 or 3 moving parts, breaks once in a while. When you have moving parts of thousands of people operating in a war zone under stress and under danger, they can make bad mistakes, and you have to adjust. That's the downside of employing people, not robots.
Right,
but even robots break as well.
I know, but people's lives aren't machines or robots.
Of course not. But the same way you have to maintain an aircraft, sometimes that aircraft breaks, accidents can happen. We're very confident with the stress testing, with the evaluation, and the proven judgment. I mean, these are the same people that the U.S. military had serving as recently as 6 months before they were out there deployed for us. So the same kind of competencies, the same kind of skill sets, the same kind of value system we re-employed to do that job.
All right, we're going to go to a short break right now, Erik, and we will be back with Erik Prince, founder of the notorious military contractor Blackwater, right after this. So stay with us, folks.
A century ago this year, the First World War started. It fundamentally changed the global political order. Later, an even weakened international system set the stage for the Second World War. Since the end of the Cold War, the global order has been in limbo under American domination. In the 21st century, just how stable are world politics?
I know CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News have taken some knocks lately, but the fact is I admire their commitment to cover all sides of a story, just in case one of them happens to be accurate.
That was funny, but it's closer to the truth than you might think. Because when politicians and the mainstream media work side by side, the joke is actually on you. At RT News, we have a different approach.
LOL.
Because the news of the world just is not this funny.
I'm not laughing, damn it, I'm not laughing.
You guys stick to the jokes, we'll handle the news.
We're back with Erik Prince, founder of private military company Blackwater. So, Erik, obviously, the one incident that's received most attention is the shooting in Nisour Square. Now, the U.S. military labeled the shooting a criminal event, an unprovoked shooting. Who should bear the brunt of responsibility?
Well, I don't know that the U.S. military labeled that at all. That might have been one person's opinion that was given. Look, that's a... anytime innocent civilians are injured or killed in battle, it's a tragedy, as you're seeing played out in Syria on a daily basis. When you have 130,000 people killed by the regime, bombing civilians, bombing schools, that's awful. What happened in Nisour Square, just to give you context, It was a very dangerous time in Iraq. There was thousands of attacks on a daily basis across the country. One of our helicopters was shot down a few days before. 2 other small arms ambushed, put some of our men in the hospital. Big roadside bomb attack. That morning started with a suicide car bomb that blew up outside of a venue where a State Department person was at a meeting. We then sent a support team to clear one of the traffic circles, making it possible for those for the team to get that person back to safety. And while they're waiting there, some cars didn't stop, didn't obey all the rules of engagement. You know, there was flashing lights, sirens, even a laser beam that you'd shine. Even warning shots. A car kept coming, so shots were fired to stop that car, and then other small arms fire started hitting our vehicles. And the reason the guy stayed there so long is because one of the incoming rounds actually severed the radiator hose at the bottom of their truck, and the radiator fluid drained out, causing them to stay much longer. So there was lots of incoming rounds, and certainly the men had to defend themselves. Anytime an innocent civilian is injured or killed, it's a tragedy.
Do you personally feel any remorse for the dead innocent victims? I mean, I understand it's the war. I get that. But still, you are a human being after all. Do you feel any remorse for that?
Sure. I feel great remorse for the 41 of our men that were killed in action doing the work between Iraq and Afghanistan. I feel bad for the Iraqi or the Afghan people who are suffering under war.
Right, but
I mean,
your
one of my
men
most satisfying...
weren't civilians just walking around or passing by. Your men were contracted military workers. We're talking about the civilian casualties.
Correct. And unfortunately, there was thousands of Iraqi civilians killed before that event and tens of thousands killed after that. Trying to work in a country that's a very active war zone where the country is ripping itself apart. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people suffering. And going and trying to help that situation, sometimes accidents can happen, but you know, so there's been tens of thousands of people killed by suicide car bombs, by militias, by them killing each other. The same is still happening in Syria. I mean, there's untold human suffering happen on a daily basis in Syria every day.
But you are like a serious private military firm. You're not suicide car bombs. What about the U.S. government? Do you feel like the U.S. government used you as a scapegoat to avoid responsibility? In terms that, yeah, these guys went nuts and shot people, we'll prosecute them just because they're a private firm.
You know, in the Vietnam War, the anti-war left went after the U.S. troops, and this time the anti-war left went after any contractors serving in that mission. And because you know, I was the sole owner of the company, I was a Navy SEAL. I came from a conservative Republican family. My father was very wealthy. You know, and our men were armed, and we had the largest weapons training facility in the country, privately owned. So. We made a perfect target to go after, and we really got caught in the politics of the left versus right. The left trying to go after George Bush and any of his policies. Unfortunately, we were a victim of those kind of plate tectonics grinding against each other.
Right, but do you feel betrayed by your own government? That's what I'm asking. Because you served them after all.
Having you know, building your business based on the merits, winning competitively bid contracts, performing well. Doing 100,000 missions with no one under our care killed or injured, and then having it trashed because of politics, yeah, that's a, you don't want to go through that again.
But when the Nisur story broke out, I remember the government gave you sort of a limited immunity. They immunized you, and then all of a sudden, it all changed. What happened there?
Again, that's the politics of Congress and of Washington, and that's why I've moved on. I sold all the Blackwater related businesses. I'm now the chairman of a company based in Hong Kong, and we're building out an aviation logistics capability to provide secure logistics for mining or energy companies, infrastructure companies doing business in Africa or in other frontier markets.
Getting back to diplomatic security, you've said that on many instances you regret working for the State Department, but you took so much pride in working for the American government. But you were so proud to work for the government. Would you do this again?
No. No, if I had to do it all over again, I would have stayed in the oil and gas industry or mining and built a business that way. Again, I never set out to really be a defense contractor. I built a training facility that performed really well. And we kept answering the phone when the U.S. government called and needed help. And in the end, we were kind of betrayed politically, and I guess in U.S. parlance, you're thrown under the bus.
Mm-hmm. You know, some claim that Blackwater was involved with the U.S. Special Forces in Pakistan and in Syria. Those are countries that U.S. isn't officially at war with. So is it like you were doing the dirty work for them?
Look, I sold the business back in 2010, and I've had nothing to do with it since then. So I can't speak to any involvement in Pakistan, and certainly not in Syria.
Yeah, what about the CIA contracts that were outed in 2009?
Well, if you read the last chapter of my book, there's a reason it's written by a third party. You know, certainly the work that I did or the company did has been leaked many times by politicians that talk too much. You can read through the detail there, but you know, in tradition with a guy named Bill Donovan, who was the founder of the OSS, the predecessor of the CIA, he believed that there's a lot to be gained from using a civilian capability from the know-how of Americans that have capability, courage, and know-how to do things in difficult places. And so I tried to continue that tradition.
You personally, do you believe the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were necessary or just a business opportunity?
Well, look, 9/11 really damaged the American psyche. You know, when you have, you know, the two tallest buildings in New York and the Pentagon and even a fourth aircraft trying to attack simultaneously, sure, the Taliban were hosting al-Qaeda, and they wouldn't reject him. The Afghanistan war was absolutely necessary. In hindsight, it probably should have been more of a punitive raid and then leave, not stay for, you know, 12 years. Iraq, again, you have a state sponsor who's willing to use chemical weapons on its own people.
But there were no chemical weapons found.
That's killed tens of thousands of them.
Right, but there were no chemical weapons found there.
Well, there were some, and I still believe they're out there.
What about now? Blackwater, as it was formerly called, is staying behind in Afghanistan after the U.S. troops leave. Are they just the Army's Trojan horse? I know you're not the hat anymore, but I'm sure you have an answer to that.
Well, look, anytime, you know, there's going to be a diplomat, there'll be an embassy there, there'll be some kind of a training or support function, I'm sure, left behind for the Afghans because you know, they need logistic support, combat service support, aviation support for the Afghan army to try to continue to defend the country. So there'll certainly be a role for private sector companies to do that. I mean, private sector companies have played a significant role in the American national security really since the founding of this country.
Why do you think that private military contractors are so widely used nowadays? Do you even think a modern war is possible without mercenaries?
Well, when you look back at military history for the last few thousand years, contractors, mercenaries, if you will, have been very much interwoven into those fabrics. Nowadays, when you have big conventional militaries built to fight conventional fights, you know, the U.S. military was built to square off against the Soviet Union over Western Europe. But when you take that conventional military and now try to retask it as a counterinsurgency force, it creates a lot of gaps, and that's the kind of private sector stuff. So, I mean, you can call, you know, if you want to say mercenaries would be cooks or cleaners or guys that do laundry or deliver the mail or drive trucks. Look, there's lots of private sector functions, and I guess one of the byproducts of modern capitalism is seeking the most efficient way to deliver a good or a service. And in that sense, the U.S. military figured it's cheaper for us to hire a contractor to do the laundry or to cook the food than it is to have, you know, 1,000 or 2,000 extra U.S. soldiers at a much higher cost basis to do that job.
Right, but you weren't exactly cooking food or doing laundry. But tell me, who else do the...
Sure, but whether it's laundry or security or fixing aircraft or operating a drone, whatever those narrow skill sets are that have to be quickly assembled to do. And the other thing, and I've given this example before, I could talk about it in my book as well. You know, we took over through a competitive bid the vertical replenishment mission, which is when you embark a helicopter on a supply ship, our helicopter, and it flies from supply ship over to warship, wherever those ships are out at sea. And we showed up to do that job with 2 helicopters and 8 guys. The Navy that we replaced was doing it with 2 helicopters and 35 guys. Same kind of helicopters, really. And so, you know, the problem is the Navy admiral that said, I need 35 people to do that mission, isn't having to pay for those. So that's the danger of separating cost from demand, and you tend to demand a lot more people.
So now we're getting back to the beginning of the show where I told you where you hired because the U.S. military wasn't as efficient as a private military firm. Turns out, yes.
Well, because we're not a business. As I often told our employees, we are not a line item in the federal budget. If we don't convince our customers to hire us, if we don't add them value and save them money, then we're done. So the private sector will always find a more innovative way to do things.
Why not privatize the military altogether?
Well, because the realm of offensive combat operations should remain the realm of the state. But the support functions, which is really where they spend a lot of their money, can be privatized and can be done very effectively. And a lot of that is done now.
I don't want to end on a dire note, but I mean, you are very proud of what you've achieved. You explained many times why, and you argued very well. But for people in general, Blackwater thrived on conflict and misery. Did it ever bother you, if you look at it that way?
No. When I look at, we used to build the Afghan border police. We built the bases, we ran the base, we trained tens of thousands of Afghan policemen, border police. And, we'd have to take them, had to adjust our schedule because these guys couldn't read, couldn't write. They'd never seen a flush toilet before, many of them. And so to take them through that, and for 8 weeks, we had them in those programs. And by the end of it, they were so proud because it was the first time they've ever been part of something first class in their life. That when they woke up in the morning, there was hot food waiting, and there was fuel for the vehicles, and the instructors knew what they were teaching, and there was ammunition for the guns, and a curriculum that they could learn from. Again, these guys had never been to a middle school or a high school, but they went to our program, and they definitely benefited from it, and we made them into a competent police officer that could operate and survive. They were enormously proud of that. And I said, look, at their graduations, we are here because 30 years of constant war in Afghanistan is enough, and we're happy to help make peace. And look, you have to have a security presence. You have to have security before you can have peace, and before those people can go from thinking very, very, very short term because they're not sure they're going to live for another week or two, into planting a farm, growing their flock, starting a business, and living a normal, peaceful life. Mm-hmm. And we're happy to be part of that solution.
Erik, thank you very much for that interesting insight into Blackwater. That was Erik Prince, founder of the private military company formerly known as Blackwater. Thank you very much. And this is it for this edition of Sophie & Co. We will see you next time.